The Giza Plateau is probably the best-known ancient site on Earth. From the Great Pyramid to the Sphinx and beyond, most can likely close their eyes and picture it. Yet, not only are these monuments among Earth's most well-known, but they stand among its most mysterious. Despite centuries of vigorous study, we are still unsure who built these things and why. 5 miles to the southwest of the Giza Plateau, in the ancient necropolis of Zayet El Aryan, a site exists which may provide the missing piece of the puzzle. A site which may hold the key to understanding all of Egypt's greatest mysteries. In May of 1900, an Italian architect and Egyptologist named Alessandro Barsanti was conducting research at a site known as the Layer Pyramid in Zayet El Aryan. Barsanti had worked for the Egyptian Antiquities Service for decades, becoming famous for his discovery of the tomb of Akhenaten in 1891, and with his vast experience, he quickly realized that the Layer Pyramid was not worth his time. By 1900, it was little more than a pile of rubble, and not a particularly impressive one at that. Moreover, its subterranean chambers were unfinished and devoid of any artifacts. Barsanti, like others before him, came to believe the site had never actually been a completed pyramid, but rather one which was started, then abandoned after the king who commissioned the project died. Discouraged, Barsanti packed up his team, intent to return to Giza and begin looking for a new project to pursue. It was on this return journey that Barsanti would accidentally stumble upon something amazing, something which would change his life forever. Instead of taking the usual road back to Giza along the edge of the desert, Barsanti decided to take a less used path running along an upper plateau, one which provided a stunning vantage point of the surrounding terrain. As he gazed out from this plateau, he noticed something which caught his eye. About 1.5 miles north of the Layer Pyramid, it appeared that the ground was strewn with large granite fragments, as well as the type of granite powder which is left behind when stones are polished during construction. Right away, the implications of this became clear to Barsanti, as he recorded in his notes. I immediately thought that they pointed to the site of a field where they had worked the blocks and movable objects destined for some great tomb, and that this tomb was to be hidden in the neighborhood. Could this really be possible? Barsanti wondered. Egyptologists had been conducting studies at Zayet El Aryan since the 1830s, and never before had they recorded anything other than the unimpressive Layer Pyramid. He had to find out. In his words, I climbed up a hill next to look over the whole of the site, and suddenly I recognized, to the south of the hill, the remains of an immense rectangular building whose walls barely stuck out of the surrounding land. Large limestone blocks still remained in place, but most of the others lay scattered here and there amid clumps of limestone. So I carefully studied the layout of the grounds, and soon I perceived, in the center of the plateau, a small depression forming a basin, and a sort of trench running from north to south. I ended up convincing myself that I was in the presence of an unknown monument large enough to make ordinary excavators hesitate. So intrigued by the potential of this unknown monument was Barsanti that he rushed to Giza and gathered a team of 50 men, returning to the mysterious site the next day to conduct a preliminary exploration. It only took 2 days for Barsanti to realize that his intuition had been correct. There was some sort of immense rectangular building buried beneath the ground. As they began to excavate, Barsanti and his team quickly found that the presumed rectangular building was actually an enormous pit built from limestone and descending deep into the earth. Moreover, they began to realize that the pit had not only been blown over by desert sand, hiding it from researchers in the decades before Barsanti had arrived, but intentionally filled with a tangled mess of limestone blocks weighing 3 to 4 tons each, thrown haphazardly down into it at some point in time. Slowly, Barsanti and his team began the process of removing these blocks, digging deeper and deeper into the pit as they did. The work was slow and arduous until, on December 8th, they would uncover something which would not only rekindle their motivation, but instantly change their entire perception of the site. At a depth of 21 meters, they came across a large pink granite block making up a part of the wall. This was different than the limestone blocks they had uncovered up to that point. Pink granite is much more valuable and much harder to work with. It was not used by the ancient Egyptians on just anything, indicating to Barsanti that the site must be something special. Excavating further, the team found more pink granite blocks connected to the first, until in February of 1905, they uncovered an enormous 30-ton pink granite block which seemed to demarcate the bottom of the pit, forming the foundation of a sort of pavement. Barsanti's decades of experience told him that this block was the find he'd been waiting for, an indication, he believed, of the entrance to a subterranean world, one surely filled with tombs and untold treasures. What made this possibility particularly exciting for Barsanti was that, to that point, he had been unable to determine who had constructed the mysterious pit. During excavation, he and his team had found numerous inscriptions carved into the stones which made up the site. Strangely, Barsanti and other Egyptologists back in Giza and Cairo, to whom Barsanti had sent sketches, had been unable to decipher the meaning of these inscriptions, with scholars disagreeing what they meant and who they could be attributed to. With each new inscription uncovered, the controversy grew. If, as Barsanti believed, there were subterranean chambers to be found beneath the pink granite, would they reveal the creators of these inscriptions? And what other secrets might they hold? Barsanti intended to find out. And so he began attempting to dig beneath the floor of the pit, using jacks and other machinery to move the 30-ton granite block and pier beneath. But when he did, what he found was another huge granite block, and beneath that, another, then another, stacked up, and each binding itself with a groove to the block above. But why? Barsanti wondered. Why go to the trouble to stack valuable pink granite like this beneath the earth? Before he could answer this question, Barsanti and his team would make another discovery, one which would prove to be the most remarkable and enigmatic at the whole site. As Barsanti wrote, "While this search was continuing on the north side, almost in the center of the west side, on March 12, I discovered an object of an entirely new form. It is a large oval vat made of pink granite, polished like a mirror, with a depth of 1 meter and 5 centimeters. It is carved out of one of the blocks of the pavement which occupies the bottom of the pit." Not only was this vat amazing on its own, with its polished mirror-like sides and strange oval shape, but, Barsanti noted, it appeared that someone in the past had gone to great lengths to protect it. In his words, they had spread over the lid a layer of lime, and over the lime a thick bed of well-spread clay, which entirely prevented it from contact with the limestone blocks stacked over it. These had, moreover, been placed regularly on the clay side by side, so as to enclose the precious form with a kind of insulating protection. Why was this done? Barsanti wondered. What importance did the vat hold, which necessitated such protection? He believed that the answer must be contained inside the vat. Not only had the entire thing been carefully protected, but it was topped by a tightly fitting lid made of similarly polished granite and sealed to the vat with plaster. Slowly, Barsanti and his team removed the lid, but when they lifted it off, they were disappointed. The vat's tank was empty. It contained no artifacts, no great treasure carefully protected. Actually, it was not completely empty. As Barsanti recorded, I only noticed that the side walls were lined with a black band that was 0 meter and 10 centimeters in height. It is probably the very light deposit of some liquid enclosed in the vat as an offering or libation, and which would have evaporated over the years. To Barsanti, this strange black deposit revealed the unusual nature of the tub. It has been hypothesized that this tank was an unused sarcophagus, but I do not think so. The care with which it was protected proves that it contains something, and the blackish deposit indicates the nature of this content. one would not have taken the precaution of concealing it under an enormous mass of blocks if it had been empty at the time. It was clear that the mystery of the pit at Zayat El Aryan was getting deeper, and Barsanti believed he had to solve it. Excavation continued until Barsanti and his team uncovered an enormous pink granite block stretching from wall to wall directly in the center of the pit, which appeared to Barsanti to have been placed there like a kind of cork in the floor. What this meant, Barsanti was certain. In his words, this enormous cork-like block surely marked the entrance to the inner apartments hidden beneath the ground. As Barsanti continued his work, his hunt for these inner apartments, word of his exploits spread across Egypt and through the world of Egyptology. Many were skeptical that he would find what he was looking for, instead choosing to believe that Barsanti was mistaken, that he was losing his touch, that in fact the pit at Zayat El Aryan was little more than the foundation for a pyramid which was never built. But then, without warning, two things happened which appeared to support Barsanti's belief. First, at the northern end of the pit, Barsanti and his team began to uncover a carefully finished staircase ascending steeply out of the pit. These were not the type of stairs created for workmen. They were too steep and too well finished, appearing almost ceremonial, the type which may lead down to inner apartments or chambers. Next, something even more incredible happened. On March 31st of 1905, a terrible storm hit, which bombarded the desert with torrential rains and filled the pit with over 3 meters of water. Incredibly, a few hours after the storm, the water level in the pit abruptly dropped by 1 meter. Surely, Barsanti asserted, this must be because the water was seeping down into some sort of subterranean chamber, into the hidden apartments he believed were waiting to be found beneath the pit. This was all the proof Barsanti needed to validate his belief, and he vowed to redouble his efforts, driving himself to near madness with desire to find out what lay beneath. Immediately, he and his team began tearing up the pink granite floor of the pit, attempting to crudely dig through the stone into the ground. But this proved to be extremely difficult. The blocks were huge and heavy, and worse still, sealed together with a strong mortar. Moreover, they were interlocked together like a puzzle, and to move one meant disturbing the whole set. By late 1906, still without having found what lay beneath the pit at Zayat El Aryan, Barsanti ran out of money, forcing him to shut down work and send his team home. But he would not quit. For years he searched for additional funding, asserting to all those who would listen that he was on the precipice of an amazing discovery. Finally, in 1911, he received his funding, and almost 5 years to the day he'd left, he returned to resume excavation. This time, Barsanti would not tread lightly, ordering his team to viciously remove the limestone blocks which made up the eastern end of the pit, digging a tunnel which would allow for the easier removal of the pink granite floor. Between the weight of the blocks, the cement-like mortar, and the interlocking pattern, the work was the most difficult his team had ever undertaken. But to Barsanti, this only proved his point. Surely whoever had constructed the site had gone to such great lengths to make the blocks of the floor unmovable because they were meant to conceal a hiding place. Surely the builders had taken such great care to protect something. Unfortunately, the work was so difficult that again, Barsanti ran out of money before he could solve the mystery. For a second time, he would have to travel the world looking for a new benefactor. But before he could find one, World War I broke out, shutting the sites of Egypt down to further exploration. Then, in 1917, Barsanti unexpectedly died at the age of 59. Rather than continue Barsanti's work, Egyptologists simply forgot about the site, leaving the mystery of what lay beneath it unsolved. As the decades passed, the pit slowly filled with sand, ignored until the 1950s, when the site was chosen as a set for the 1954 movie The Land of the Pharaohs. To make it ready for the movie, sand was cleared from the pit and it was made to look as it would have when it was first built. This provided the opportunity for stunning photographs and video of the site to be taken for the first time. Intrigued by the amazing shots presented in the movie, two Italian scholars, Vito Marigiolio and Celeste Rinaldi, decided to head to the site and investigate further. Armed with Barsanti's original notes, they would aim to finally continue his work. Yet, by the time they arrived in the early 1960s, they found that again, the pit had begun to fill with sand, which would have to be removed before any serious study was started. Consequently, what they could achieve in their short time at the site was limited, as they wrote in a report on their work. Our own survey and trail digs could only be superficial and enabled us to determine only a few particulars of the rudimentary superstructure. The reason that they could not go any further was that in 1964, access to the site was suddenly restricted by the Egyptian government, who unexpectedly chose Zayed El Arian as the site for a new military base. Marigiolio and Rinaldi were quickly expelled, and never again would researchers get a look at the mysterious pit, its secrets lost amidst military bungalows. The question is, why would the Egyptian military choose Zayed El Arian for a base and restrict access to such a mysterious site at exactly the moment when interest in its mystery was renewed? Of course, today, many mainstream Egyptologists assert that there is no mystery to be solved, that the site at Zayed El Arian is nothing more than an unfinished pyramid, its enormous pit simply the remains of a foundation started for this pyramid. They are not bothered that access is restricted because they believe there is nothing left to investigate. Yet, like many of the proclamations of mainstream Egyptologists, the assertion that the site at Zayed El Arian is simply an unfinished pyramid is an argument with little proof and many obvious holes. To begin with, the only person to ever officially examine the site in person, Alessandro Barsanti, who, remember, was a respected Egyptologist with decades of experience, explicitly stated that he did not believe it was an unfinished pyramid. It might be asked where the idea that it was an unfinished pyramid even came from, if not the person actually examining it. But there is more than that. If the pit was just a foundation for a pyramid, why was its floor made up of huge interlocking granite blocks held together with a strong mortar, like an interlocking puzzle designed to prevent its removal? Why go to the trouble of building such an astonishing and complex floor if the pit was just going to be filled with limestone as part of a pyramid foundation? Moreover, why use pink granite in the first place? As already stated, pink granite was both extremely valuable and notoriously hard to work with. Further, to reach Zayed El Arian, pink granite would have to have been brought from a quarry at Aswan, some 580 miles away, floated down the Nile on enormous barges, and then dragged for miles through the sand to reach the site. This seems like an incredible waste of time, effort, and money for something which was just going to be buried. If the pit was a pyramid foundation, why not just use limestone? There is also the matter of the inscriptions found at the site. If there truly is nothing more to investigate, then why, to this day, are Egyptologists unable to form a consensus on what the inscriptions mean and where they came from? And what about the oval vat, the most mysterious thing of all Barsanti found during his work at the site? If the pit was a pyramid foundation, then what purpose did this finely crafted vat serve? Why was it so intricately carved into an oval, which is much harder to construct than a rectangle, polished like a mirror, with a perfectly fitting lid, if it was intended to be covered? And why take such care to protect it with lime and clay, and embed it in interlocking blocks of the floor to prevent its removal? Moreover, what was the black residue Barsanti had discovered within it? What had this mysterious tub once contained? Taken together, It is clear that the assertion that the pit at Zayat El Aryan is simply an unfinished pyramid is suspect at best and completely wrong at worst. In either case, what is clear is that a great mystery remains. So, what was the pit at Zayat El Aryan? In modern times, some have begun to provide an answer, and it starts 5 miles away on the Giza Plateau. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands to this day as one of Earth's greatest mysteries. Despite centuries of research, scientists are still not totally sure how it was built or its purpose. Conventional wisdom says it was constructed as a tomb for the 4th dynasty pharaoh Khufu, yet many have pointed out that it lacks the characteristics which define other tombs across Egypt. No human remains have ever been found within it. Neither have any artifacts, jewelry, or art, or the household items an entombed pharaoh would be buried with for use in the afterlife. Because these holes in the idea of the Great Pyramid as a tomb exist, many other theories have emerged over the years explaining its purpose, from an astrological temple to a place for storing grain and beyond. One of the most astounding theories of all emerged in the 1960s thanks to a man named Edward Kunkel. In 1962, Kunkel published a book entitled Pharaoh's Pump, which shook up the world of Egyptology. In it, he argued that the passages and chambers in and beneath the Great Pyramid were the conduits and reservoirs of a giant water pump which would have been used to send water out into the desert to irrigate the land. According to Kunkel, the pyramid actually contained 2 pumps, one underground, represented by the pyramid's mysterious subterranean chamber, and the other one above ground in the middle and upper chambers. Together, they would create 2 streams which would exit the pyramid through shafts in the north and south sides. Unsurprisingly, Kunkel's work caused great skepticism, not only from Egyptologists who rejected the theory outright, but from engineers who pointed out that Kunkel's design would have required the creation of a vacuum, a number of valves, and some type of combustible fuel and combustion chamber to drive the pump. Yet, not bound by the same restrictions as mainstream Egyptology, many engineers began to look closer at Kunkel's work, realizing that it was not totally without merit. While Kunkel's 2-pump design would likely not have been possible, some engineers noted that a ram pump might actually make sense. A ram pump is a simple device used for centuries to move water from a reservoir to somewhere else using 2 moving parts and the force of gravity. Could the builders of the Great Pyramid really have created a ram pump on such a massive scale? With the possibility established, other researchers and scholars picked up on the idea, designing a theoretical layout in which the Great Pyramid was fed with water from the Western Nile and nearby Lake Moeris, which each sat at a higher elevation, making them, according to researchers, the perfect sources for a gravity-fed water system on the Giza Plateau. Some even believe that the retaining wall, which is known to have once surrounded the pyramid complex, could have been an embankment for an on-site reservoir. As more and more people came to believe that the Great Pyramid really could have been an enormous ancient water pump, they were backed by one simple overarching argument: economics. Think about it. The Great Pyramid is made up of 2.3 million blocks, each weighing between 25 and 80 tons, meaning that if workers moved and laid 12 blocks per hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would have taken 20 years to construct. More than that, it has been estimated that, adjusted into modern dollar values, the pyramid would have cost more than $5 billion to create. Simply, why go to all this trouble and all this expense just for a tomb? Obviously, Egyptian pharaohs had more leeway than modern democratically elected leaders, but they were not totally unbound from the realities of finance and economics. Would it not make more sense to go to all this trouble for something which was going to provide a higher return on investment, like, say, a water pump, which would allow you to irrigate your civilization and feed your people? Here, we must take a step back in order to get to the point. If the Great Pyramid really was an enormous water pump, then it must have been pumping the water somewhere. This is where some have connected the dots and returned to the mysterious pit at Zayat el Aryan. They believe that the site was not an unfinished pyramid, but an outflow location for water pumped by the Great Pyramid, the giant pit designed as a reservoir for water pumped in from below. They looked to the oval tub and how tightly it was sealed over with clay and lime, and theorized that perhaps this was where the water came up. Perhaps it had been sealed at a time when the pump was no longer in use to prevent leaking. The pit eventually filled with a tangled mass of limestone blocks at a later date, as if burying a spring. Remember, when Barsanti had cleared these blocks, the water from a torrential rainstorm had seeped into the ground. Barsanti thought this was due to the presence of hidden apartments, but perhaps it was actually due to the water seeping into an unused underground water system. Could the ancients really have built an underground irrigation system driven by a mighty pump which stretched to Zayat el Aryan and across Egypt? In modern times, research on the subject has continued, and in fact, science is beginning to reveal that it might actually go much further than pumping water for irrigation. Early in 1999, a marine engineer named John Cadman was perusing the shelves at a used bookstore when he stumbled across an old, dusty copy of a most unusual book written by one Edward Kunkel and entitled Pharaoh's Pump. As an expert in hydraulics, the book intrigued Cadman, so he purchased it and took it home. When he began to read it more closely, he quickly realized that Kunkel's idea was not as ridiculous as he had initially assumed. Wanting to know more, Cadman began to learn everything he could about the Great Pyramid. Almost immediately, what he discovered captivated him. The Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber, he realized, looked eerily like the layout for a ram pump. He took his research further, noting from photographs that the subterranean chamber showed obvious signs of water damage. Particularly on the ceiling, where signs of cavitation, which is caused by gas bubbles in water due to violent churning, were evident, as well as clear damage from compression waves striking it. In other words, it was not just that the subterranean chamber could work as a water pump, but, according to Cadman's trained eyes, it appeared it had worked as such. At this point, Cadman knew what he had to do. He must draw upon his years of experience with hydraulics and create his own scale model of the pyramid and its subterranean chamber to see if it would really work as a water pump. In July of '99, he built his first model using a nearby river as a reservoir. Unfortunately, the model did not work, first leaking, then cracking, and failing to pump water as he had hoped. But Cadman would not give up that easily. He built another model, then another, both of which suffered the same fate as the first. But on his fourth try, he got everything right, and much to Cadman's delight, his pump worked. This proved to Cadman, beyond a doubt, that the Great Pyramid could have functioned as a giant water pump, and that surely this was not by accident. It was clear, he asserted, that the creators of the Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber had known exactly what they were doing. This was the breakthrough that disciples of Edward Kunkel's original work in the 1960s had been waiting for. The tangible proof that a Great Pyramid water pump was more than just speculation. And yet, as Cadman continued his research, the results got even more mind-blowing and, in fact, went far beyond the mere pumping of water. Having proved that the Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber could function as a water pump, Cadman built a new, bigger model and encased it in concrete in order to simulate the effects of the pump operating underground. He moved the model, which weighed over 500 pounds, to a seasonal creek with a pond serving as a reservoir. As this model began to work, Cadman immediately noticed something which shocked him. Encased in concrete, the pump was creating a vertical compression wave, a recurring heartbeat-like thump, which could be felt through the ground 20 feet away and heard more than 100 feet away. Cadman realized that what he had constructed went far beyond just a water pump. Because of the powerful waves it generated, Cadman renamed this device a pulse generator. Truly, this changed everything. If the Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber was generating pulse waves, these waves would have moved through the granite upper chambers and passageways of the pyramid and, due to granite's reflective properties, created ionization in the atmosphere, in effect producing an electric field. Put more simply, the pulses created by the subterranean pump would have interacted with the pyramid's granite to produce electricity. It appeared that Cadman had not only proven that the Great Pyramid could function as a water pump to move water around Egypt for irrigation, but one which could actually create electricity in ancient times. Could this really be possible? Of course, those who have watched this channel before will know that the idea of the Great Pyramid as an electrical generator did not start with John Cadman. In fact, as early as the turn of the 20th century, it appeared prominently in the work of famed inventor Nikola Tesla. If you are not familiar with the greatness of Tesla, you're going to want to watch our complete video on Tesla's secret inventions that were lost or censored. But while many of you will already be aware of the work of Tesla, you may not be aware of his obsession with ancient Egypt, and specifically the pyramids, which he studied in detail, wrote about, and incorporated into his work. Consider, in 1905, Tesla filed a patent titled Art of Transmitting Electrical Energy Through a Natural Medium, which contained the design for something called Tesla's electromagnetic pyramid. Supplementing his genius with what he had learned about ancient Egypt, his idea was to use a huge pyramid-like structure to project energy skyward, where it could then be harnessed by individual receptors around the world. Interestingly, Tesla actually built a model of his electromagnetic pyramid known as Wardenclyffe Tower, a 187-foot tall structure topped with a 55-ton dome of conductive metal. Unfortunately, before he could conclusively prove that his model could create energy, Tesla lost his funding and the project was abandoned. And yet, even though Tesla's work on electromagnetic pyramids disappeared, the idea did not. Thanks to Tesla, many began to look at the Great Pyramid with fresh eyes, and specifically its original makeup, covered in white tufa limestone blocks, which are known for unparalleled insulating properties. Its tunnels and chambers beneath lined with granite, a well-known electrical conductor. Simply, this would have been the perfect layout if the intent was to create and utilize electricity. Little granite channels of electrical conductivity surrounded by insulation, not unlike copper wires encased in rubber in modern electronic devices. Moreover, it is known that the Great Pyramid was originally topped by a capstone of gold, one of the most electrically conductive materials on Earth, similar to how Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower was topped with a 55-ton metal ball. In other words, if the Great Pyramid was designed for electricity, its builders couldn't have done it better, and if it wasn't, well, in an historic coincidence, they'd accidentally stumbled into the perfect design. Indeed, so suggestive was the evidence that the idea continued to develop into modern times. Christopher Dunn is a mechanical engineer who has worked for more than half a century at the highest levels of aerospace manufacturing. In the 1970s, Dunn began to develop an interest in the mysteries of the Great Pyramid of Giza. At the same time as he worked his day job in the aerospace industry, he began spending his spare time researching the Great Pyramid from a mechanical engineering perspective. Slowly but surely, he came to the belief that there was more to the pyramid than it seemed. In his words, "I came to the conclusion that with such an investment of resources and the extreme precision which was crafted into the building, it was a building that functioned as a machine, and the machine was used to harness energy from the earth. I was inspired to research and discover how this machine operated." For more than 20 years, he conducted his research, becoming a prominent expert on the subject, publishing dozens of articles and appearing as a trusted voice across mainstream television. In 1998, 1 year before John Cadman's legendary experiments, which proved the electrical capacity of the Great Pyramid, Dunn finally published his seminal work, titled The Giza Power Plant. The book meticulously described a system in which the Great Pyramid drew seismic energy from the Earth, producing electricity in the King's Chamber through the use of hydrogen created by a chemical reaction in the Queen's Chamber. So groundbreaking was Dunn's work that it inspired researchers around the world to follow his lead. For more than 2 decades, research has continued and expanded, becoming only more astonishing every year. In fact, more than ever, science, and specifically mainstream science, is taking the idea of the Great Pyramid as an electrical generator seriously. Indeed, in 2018, a study was published in the prestigious Journal of Applied Physics, which examined the Great Pyramid's response to radio waves and concluded that the pyramid could in fact concentrate electromagnetic energy in its internal chambers as well as under its base, seeming to confirm the research of Cadman and the ideas of Tesla. Then, in 2019, a new book was published by Egyptologists James Brown and J.J. and Desiree Hurtak, entitled Giza's Industrial Complex, which built on the work of Dunn to suggest that the entire Giza Plateau functioned as an energy-generating system. According to the authors, the structures around and beneath the plateau were designed to activate a sophisticated process of water splitting, which would allow hydrogen to be used as a fuel source. As they put in the book, there is good evidence that the Great Pyramid was a gigantic water processing plant to create electrified water. It is indicative of how far the idea of the Great Pyramid as an electrical generator has come, that the book and the idea were not immediately written off as ridiculous. In fact, instead of being mocked, the book actually won awards, including the prestigious New York City Big Book Award. Again, now more than ever, mainstream science views the possibility of the Great Pyramid as an electrical generator as eminently possible. With this in mind, let's return to where we started, to Zayat el-Aryan. Could the pit at Zayat el-Aryan have been connected to the Great Pyramid by underground passages used to move water, as many have suggested, but not for the purpose of irrigation, rather to move electrified water used to fuel an ancient civilization, as Brown and Hurtak proposed? Maybe this has something to do with the black residue found in the pit's oval tub by Barsanti. Could this be evidence of some sort of electrical burning or chemical process? The polished mirror-like tub, the place where electricity was generated? Perhaps this is why research on the site was so abruptly shut down in 1964, why it is now locked within a well-guarded military zone. Perhaps beneath the pit at Zayat el-Aryan, hidden in an area Alessandro Barsanti tried so hard to get to, is the proof of an electrical ancient Egypt, the type of secrets which would totally change our understanding of human history. Want to know more about the secrets of Zayat el-Aryan and the possibility of an electrical ancient Egypt? Watch our video on the Ark of the Covenant's true purpose. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, and if you're new, hit subscribe and the bell next to it for future notifications.